with the seminar today. Our speaker is Lynn Catlin, who has been working with our senior design projects for the last 4 years?
6.
6 years. Wow, you're almost as old as I am. And I'm going to let him do most of his introduction and talk about what he's been learning as he's been studying leadership. Welcome, Lynn.
Excellent. Can you go ahead and
share screen? Yes. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. Come on. There we go. Come on. There we go.
Excellent.
How about that?
That works.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so you should be able to see my PowerPoint now. Got that?
Got it.
Excellent. Okay, so as Justin mentioned, I've been doing senior design for the past 6 years. And in that time, I've led over 75 teams through the senior design program. And prior to that, I was managing a design group in Mankato, Minnesota. And prior to that, I was traveling internationally, working directly with customers, working with colleagues in international locations, and trying to get the right designs out, get between software and machines and so forth, and trying to integrate the needs of customers and companies and stakeholders. And all of that takes leadership. We're going to take a look at that kind of aspect today. And I want everybody to feel free to jump in if they have any comments or statements at any time, and we'll go from there. So, let's start out. A lot of people have a lot of different meanings on different words. So what is leadership? If you just type it into good old Google, one of the first things that pop up is the action of leading or group of people or an organization. Okay, that makes sense. But if you look up leading, you can then get guidance or leadership, especially in a spiritual context. So we have kind of a circular definition that really doesn't do us any good there. And it doesn't really define how leadership might be different than management. Well, now we've got a little bit more of a definition. The best leaders are those who seek every opportunity to communicate and mentor others in an effort to clarify team objectives. We're getting down the road now. We've got a little bit more description, some ability to communicate and mentorship. That sounds pretty good. But it's still, that can be done by a manager. That can be done by somebody who's really making things very distinct. And it doesn't really look at leadership in the context that I'd like to talk about today. So let's take a look at another definition. Let me start by asking everyone to try something here. I'd like you to take your hands and hold them out in front of you like this. Keep your fingers together, but relaxed. Pretending you're holding all the things you need to do. Look at them for a moment. Are you doing that? Can you guys give me a react? You do a little clap or thumbs up, something like that. Let me know that you're doing that. Okay, great. Thank you. We're going to come back to this, okay? Now, here's the key. Why did you do that? Were you required to, or did I ask you to? And you decided to do so. It brings me to the simple truth that how we're going to define leadership here. Leadership is influence. As John Maxwell says, nothing more, nothing less. Think about some of the leaders that you've had, some people who have really heavily influenced you. And think about the fact that the people who follow them, the people who do what they're going to do or what they say to do or what they lead you to do, that's all by influence. Nobody's got a noose around your neck and nobody's got a gun to your head. And you're doing that because you buy into their vision. You agree with where they're going. And you will work hard to get there alongside them. So that's how I think of leadership. And that's different than management. That's different than a title of a manager or a title of a group leader. And that leads us to the fact that everybody can be a leader. And I think that's one of the things that students often aren't aware of as they get toward the end of their career, or even people who are in high school or people who are beyond school or haven't gone to school don't understand that leadership exists everywhere. Back in 2002, 2003, I started umpiring. That is leadership. Even though nobody really wants to follow you if they're a parent, uh, you're leading. You're leading the players, you're leading the coaches, and you are leading the parents toward sportsmanlike conduct and good games and so forth. And so we very much practice leadership in an everyday sense when we're working with other people, when we want to influence them in the proper direction. So let's take a look at a few leadership myths. So one of the things that people believe or hear is that only people capable of leadership are ones that have done it before. Number one, everybody starts somewhere. Number two, just because you've done it before doesn't mean you're particularly good at it or should keep doing it. We've all met plenty of people in leadership positions that probably could use some humility or use some refinement in their leadership processes. Also, another myth, I'm so important and capable, I can and should multitask. You ever walked in and wanted to work with your leader and wanted to communicate something, or you've got a plight and you can't get their attention, or you don't think you've got their attention because they're working on something and they're not giving you their 100% attention? I read a very unfortunate story about 2 days ago from one of my connections who was mentoring another person who was on a Zoom meeting and happened to get another short message and another email that were both so urgent, she was trying to reply to them and wrote the wrong things to the wrong people. And so I would suggest, as a leader and in a leadership sense, focus on people, focus on who you're focusing on. Everybody's got time to wait. And if you need to leave the Zoom meeting to go do that, leave the Zoom meeting, do that, focus, and come back. Another one, I don't have time to develop my leadership. I hear this a lot from people who are in leadership. There's a popular book called Getting Stuff Done. And a lot of people say they don't have time to get stuff done because they're doing other things. And I would say that there's actually a lot of time available, that you can and should continually develop your leadership. You know, back in the 80s or 70s, people had a particular philosophy of management leadership. We're only where we're at today because people kept evolving. And we've only come through to a sense of connection to people in leading because we evolved past the whole 1-minute manager, get stuff done. And I would say that's a good thing. Another myth, in a way, I must get my hands dirty and lead by example. Well, that's true if you're doing the right things. But a leader spending their time doing something off track from leading simply to check a box probably isn't leading correctly. That one's a difficult one to discern. But I would say that when you're getting your hands dirty and when you're helping out the team, keep your eye on the ball for overall what needs to be led. And finally, I think the biggest one is that leaders are fearless. That is a huge myth. Leaders have fear. They have concerns. And nothing is ever clear, especially this day and age. Today's situation that we're facing, came to campus today to conduct this, and campus is empty. This is a huge impact on students, faculty, staff, the community. The community doesn't have that central buzz happening, whether it's here on campus or whether it's a community center or a neighborhood park. These things have all been upset. And as a leader, you're needing to challenge yourself and be able to help people see what they should be fearful of and what they shouldn't. So that brings me to my last point on this, is that while leaders do get concerned, they identify the concern and address the concern, and the rest of it's noise. I would recommend a book called The Rock Warrior's Way. Now, many of you know that I am a rock climber, and this book is directly focused on rock climbing and how to assess fear. What is a real fear of a situation, and what is a presumed fear and keeping you from doing what you're normally completely able to? Nobody ever says to set aside safety in any sense, whether it be machine work, whether it be business safety or risk of a project, but identify what the concerns are and overcome that barrier. So we're talking about leaders and how to follow leaders and so forth. And you've probably heard this before, the 7 sources of power. And I wanted to talk about them a little bit as we move into how to lead. So we talked a little bit about the myths. We talked about some circumstances of leadership. So these are generally identified as the sources of power. You have legitimate power, or your manager. You have coercive and reward power, which are 2 sides of the same coin. Either the coercive power, you need to do this or you'll be written up or fired. Or if you do this for me, I'll give you Monday off. And those are not really positive sources of power. Then you have power of connection. Imagine somebody comes up to you and says, oh, can you give me tickets to the football game? I can get Brad Pitt to come speak, right? That's a connection power. And a lot of people refer to that. And along those same lines and close to that is referent power. And that's what we're talking about, charisma, where somebody can speak well, where somebody is what you might call a natural born leader, and you look up to them because of their interaction with you, their apparent connection to you. And that is a very good source of power, and that gets somebody's foot in the door over being inspirational. But what we're really looking at here, when we're looking at the ability to influence right out of the gate, we're talking about either expert power or informational power. Now, I had a lot of expert power on one of my last business trips before I came to Boise State. I went over to China, and the company I was working with was going to refuse shipment on a machine. And the plant manager was very sure that he didn't want that machine. However, I was able to convince him and get agreement for him not to return the machine because I assured him that myself and our engineering team and our manufacturing team could get him the changes to the machine that he would want in plenty of time. And we did succeed in that, but I was leaning completely on expert power, showing him that I could get that done. And along those same lines, informational power. What information do you have? What connections do you have? A little bit of connection power, but what can you share that can help the person who needs to be influenced or who needs the information? Those are very healthy sources of power. Now let's take a look at influential leadership. Now this comes from a blog, and I thought it was a really excellent summary because I've had several students ask me, what can I do as a younger person or as a person stepping into a work group where I don't have that title? I'm not the group leader. How do I get people to start following me and influencing me or being influenced by me? And I would say the first one is cultivate your personal brand. You have interests, you have a direction. People that know me know that my focus is positive leadership, that I believe in engaging and empathizing and working with somebody to help them succeed. That's my personal brand. Be positive and proactive. When you face a challenge, when something happens, you're going to have to find a way around it. If you stop at every barrier, you're going to get nowhere. And when you look inside yourself and when you're going for a goal, you're going to need to overcome those barriers. So work on leveraging your positive viewpoint. Also, leverage your networks. Get to know people. And creating a large LinkedIn network with a bunch of names of people you don't interact with, that's one way. But working with the people, communicating and connecting with people is how you end up finding out that there are 6 degrees of separation. It's how you find out that the world is really actually a small place. There's a lot of people I've developed connections with through the senior design work that I run into in other aspects of my life now. And we happen to have worked together with a senior design project, or I went and, for example, one of my senior design vendors is Metalcraft in South Boise. Well, I used to umpire with Ken Cortez, and Ken is the president of Metalcraft. So these kind of things all happen. So get your network in place. It's not important just for finding a job. It's important for getting stuff done. Make time for people. I spoke about this earlier about not multitasking. When somebody comes into my office, I feel horrible if I have to eat lunch in front of them, because I'm kind of eating lunch and connecting with them. Not only is there a general politeness issue with that, but there's also the idea of focusing on the conversation. And I know I used to be horrible at it, and I used to think, oh, I need to keep getting stuff done and I talk to somebody or whatnot. But really, again, when you make time to connect with people and get to know them, and even spend time chatting with them at the water cooler, that's incredibly important. And just having that connection and understanding what their life is about and where their goals are going, that's huge. And finally, utilize influencing techniques. We'll talk about this in a little bit, but the goal here is that once you have your personal brand and you have motivation and you've got networks of people and you have their trust because you've empathized with them and you've connected with them, if you have a goal and you need the whole group going that way, you can utilize that connection and that relationship to help get buy-in for the group. Check that buy-in, see where you guys need to go. It's not just your vision, it's the group's vision. Bring the group with you, show them which way to go, and take their ideas as well. So I would say, really, in summary, when you lead today, lead with heart. Know where you want to go. You can't go somewhere that you don't want to go. That'll be painful. You'll end up getting to that destination and you'll want to be somewhere else. And by leading with your heart, you will overcome those challenges. Next, have grit. I borrow this term from one of my most influential leaders, a person that I follow very closely, John Gordon, talks about the fact that it's going to take grit to get through the problems. Many businesses back in 2002, 2007, 2008, and now in 2020 have to have absolute grit to get through the trouble and to get on the other side. Think outside the box, keep going. Returning a little bit to the climbing analogy, Rock Warrior's Way talks about the fact that most of the time somebody falls off a climb, they actually let go. They don't fall, but they figure they're about to fall, and so they let go. And if they just commit and hold on and stick through it, that's when you overcome challenges. And finally, and most importantly, read, attend webinars, study leadership aspects. Find those articles. Take 5 minutes and read an article. Take 20 minutes a night and read a book that you've heard focuses on a subject you're interested in. Once you find one or two books you really like, you're going to find more and more and more. This goes back to sharpening the saw or practicing and learning your leadership skills. Make time for it and you'll be rewarded. Now, it's not just about leadership. It's about personal development. It's about any aspect, whether it be communication ability, whether it be influencing ability, meeting etiquette, and so forth. All of those aspects of personal development are really important to keep going. And that's why ABET has as a fundamental goal to have students continue to know how to learn themselves. And finally, I wanted to share with you the leadership reading list that I've really focused on. These sources, It's Your Ship, is a wonderful source to really set the context of the fact that everybody doing their job knows how to do it really well. So as a leader or manager, you don't need to tell them how to do their job. You might give them goals and a direction that you need them to go or boundaries, but they know how to do it. And speaking of that, boundaries for leaders. The premise of that book is you get the culture you create and allow. Two sides of that coin. Power positive leadership. I think you've heard me mention the positive leadership and John Gordon's influence on me. He has a very large series of books, but the power of positive leadership really sums this up in its entirety in being able to focus on moving through barriers and having grit. Likewise, The Carpenter is another wonderful book to dig into what's in your heart. Where do you want to go? I highly recommend Harvard Business Review. I've been reading it for 3 years. It's a really good source of personal development articles, quick reads, and I jump online at least once every couple weeks and dig through a few new articles. Rock Warriors Way, we talked about. Mining Group Gold. If everybody doesn't like meetings as much as I don't like meetings, I would highly suggest this book. In the beginning of this book, it really focuses on what's the purpose of the meeting and can it be handled with an email or a call to 1 or 2 people, rather than pulling in 6 or 8 people to an hour-long meeting where 2 or 3 people contribute. Crucial Conversations. Now, this one is much more about life than it is leadership. It really talks about what is your goal in a crucial conversation. A crucial conversation is defined as having 2 opposing options or 2 opposing viewpoints. Somebody is really emotional, and there's going to be some energy or emotions involved with it. And Crucial Conversations walks you through a framework to understand your motivation, understand your triggers, and to help you move past those and keep the conversation headed in a positive direction. 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I use that as a textbook for senior design. And I do so because over 20 years in the semiconductor industry, I can't remember a major dysfunction that did not involve one of those 5. And for the 3 cohorts now that I've had read it, I've had many students say that they've either recommended it to their parent or recommended it to a coworker or a boss in their current job. And the other side of that is the ideal team player. As an individual, when you want to contribute to a team, or if you're looking to add an individual to a team, they've got to have one of 3 characteristics. Are they humble? Are they hungry? And are they smart? The book does a really good job breaking that down and defining that. And lastly, I would say EntreLeadership. It has an excellent framework that Dave Ramsey has laid out for reward and structure and allowing a team to thrive in what they want to do. So lastly, I would say, I want to return back to this and think again about that stack of things in your hands. And remember, you're being pulled in many, many directions. And you don't need to solve everything today. Some of it can't be solved today. Some of it can't be solved this week. Let people help you decide to lead well with the priorities that you need today, and let the rest of it take care of itself in due time. So with that, I'd like to ask if anybody has any questions.
Are you going to be publishing that reading list somewhere, Lynn?
Yeah, Justin, have we got a good place to put this?
I can put it on the list with the webinar page.
Great. Yeah, I'll get a copy of that slide and get that on there.
This is Tony Clark from the advisory board.
Yeah.
I had a chance to see Admiral Abramoff speak when I worked at Siemens, and he was a very good speaker. And whenever someone has an opportunity to see a military leader, especially one from the Navy, because they're a large leadership organization. It's very informative. TED Talks, YouTubes, all that stuff they're very good.
Excellent. That's good to hear. Thanks, Tony. I would love to see him. His book was probably one of the first leadership books that I read, and had a profound impact on me because it made perfect sense. It was quite a good story about turning around the laughing stock of the Navy into one of the best ships, a model ship and a model team. And it came from some very simple seeds.
I would like to know like how this would apply to people on a smaller scale. Like maybe you're not meant to run a company or something. Like how would you apply these skills otherwise?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, that's a great question, Brooklyn. I appreciate that. I started leading that I can remember probably back when I was in high school. I was a peer educator, and I worked with a team of 3 or 4 other students, and we worked to help reach out to at-risk students, some of our friends that we saw having problems. That's leadership. That's reaching out and going and being connected to somebody and concerned about helping them move forward. And this can happen with even student groups. If you have 3 people together in ME 310 and you guys are doing some experiments and you're having problems, then you may be able to find a way to help identify the strengths of your partners and your own strength, and assign skills that lead to your strengths. Or if somebody wants to extend their skills, tutor them or mentor them and help out in helping them bring up their skills. So this can happen in you can lead one other person. Many people often talk about, for example, their spouse is a wonderful influence and got them through some really hard times. I know I'm just about to graduate myself, and it turns out my spouse has been an excellent leader. There were times that I really had a hard time keep going, and it was my wife who brought me and kept influencing me and helping me focus and get to the next step. So you don't need to look at leadership or management as far as a whole department or an entire division or a company. Leadership can happen with 2 people.
So, Lynn, one of the things that we find is that there's sometimes this confusion between a role and a leader, and that sometimes that's a very politically charged differentiation. What happens when you're in a situation where somebody who has a role that is above you is not a very good leader, and you know what needs to be done? How do you influence the group without causing problems for the person who is the appointed role for supervision?
It's a really good question. Yes, that does happen a lot. First and foremost, and this actually reaches towards probably a really good interview skill. How can you help your leader get a gold star? And if you're in the situation where you're underneath a leader and the leader isn't sure where to go, and the leader, and let's step out of the context, let's call him a manager. Let's say the manager doesn't know where to go or isn't going in the right direction. There's a lot of the skills that I've talked about here in influencing, especially with crucial conversations. That book is really key to discussing things and helping people understand where you might want to go. You can help influence the direction by thinking about what the leader's goals are, what the leader wants done, and how can you influence what you believe to be a better result. Now, I'm not saying go against the leader. That can be dangerous, and there's a lot of things that, the leader may have a very good reason that he or she can't share with you about why we're going in a particular direction. But hopefully they're open to the discussion and open to having that closed door discussion. I would say one of the things that younger professionals need to learn is the idea of having that closed door talk with the manager or with the leader to understand and be able to connect and empathize. And you don't necessarily need to push back, but if you learn the reasons and if you can help them understand how what you want to do gets that achieved, more often than not, they're probably going to go with it. I would also say that you're right in thinking about role versus action. I know when I had my design group back in Minnesota that I was a leader by title, and I was a leader in as much as I could lead from my point of view. But in any work group, there is always an unofficial leader. There was always a leader. Say in that work group, I was managing 8 people. One of those people had more charisma and more street credibility with that group than I had as their manager. And I focused as a manager on being one-on-one with that charismatic leader. And that helps you get a lot more done. And you can be that charismatic leader underneath the manager. Okay, it looks like Lynn Olson had copied in the reading list there if people are interested in that.
Hey, Lynn, this is Don. Gotta ask a question. You know, and you may have touched on it a little bit more earlier, but I just maybe just the idea. One of the things that it's always kind of been, you know, one of the areas that I think about when I think about leadership, and it's kind of come up on me more recently, is this idea of symbolizing that which you want to promote. So the symbolic leadership, and then also just kind of maybe speak on that, but also maybe one of the other conversations that you and I have had related to humility and the role of being humble as a leader. I think that's something that sometimes gets missed.
Thanks for reminding me about that, Don. Yeah, I would say humility. You know, we were talking about how a manager may not know where to go, and you may believe that we need to go somewhere else or get it done a different way. It may be the same goal, but maybe getting it done a different way. But Don's absolutely right. I think having the humility to know that you don't know everything. That's where the ideal team player comes in. It's humble, hungry, and smart. You may be really hungry, really driven to get something done. You may be really smart into politically how to maneuver that, how to get that through. But unless you also have the humility to treat everybody very carefully and with respect and with empathy, and have that humility to know that you may not know it right, I think that does make a very strong leader. And I will say, you know, one of the things that has been helpful in my work at the university has been having leaders in the university, and you know, Don, yourself, as well as the dean and other university leaders, being approachable. And when there's a chaotic situation happening and we're not quite sure how to handle it with whatever it might be, having a sounding board and a person to be able to go to and talk through those issues and try to determine a direction to go, I think that's very important. And what Don is talking about, the humility is important. And also, again, he mentioned the symbolic leadership, and that's where I was talking about the charismatic leader of the group. You may not be a direct leader. You may be a leader in symbol, and not a manager. And being a leader and being a manager often, hopefully, are the same thing, but there's many more leaders than there are managers.
Thank you. That was a great answer. And thanks for the great talk.
Thank you.
So, quick question. For the folks that are out there who are students, how many of you have had to do work in a formal leadership capacity? So for those who have been in that position, is there anything that Lynn talked about that has resonated with you in the role that you've had? Okay.
Let's look at another aspect here.
Yeah.
Something you said, and something that I was talking about with Don's comment. Another interesting aspect of leadership is, for example, when I worked at Micron between 2001 and 2007, I was a process engineer, excuse me, and I was working to refine the vision inspection process that was happening on the floor. Now, I needed the buy-in and the commitment and the cooperation of machine operators and technicians. neither of which reported to me, and neither of which really had to do anything I was asking. The operator's job is to get that machine running, keep quality product running through, and get an output. And I was asking them to do more work above and beyond that in order to develop processes that increased quality and yield. And in order to do that, they had to add complexity to what they were doing. But I was able to get that buy-in, and I was able to get that camaraderie because they knew of the importance of the work. They knew of the output, and they knew how things would improve if the work was successful. And if the work wasn't successful, it would keep us from instituting policies that were useless. So kind of back to the whole it's your ship thing, where I worked with them in helping figure out what was and what wasn't important to sustain yield or to improve yield.
One of the things that I think that we look at too is that there are people who are influencers. You hear about them now. There's media influencers and social influencers and that type of thing. And they are self-appointed that way to a large extent. I'm going to go out there and be the voice of something like that. But one of the things that that struck me by those types of relationships is that leadership, that influencing, is given to them freely by the people that are out there in the world. So they become our leaders because we let them. And I think sometimes we may follow leaders just because it's easier than it is forming our own opinions or making our own way. And I'm just wondering if you can talk to that for just a minute.
Yeah, I think part of that is, and I've seen it with my own kids, I've seen it with my stepdaughter, and it boggles the mind about how people can follow somebody. And it's just not kids that are just following them. I mean, we have grown adults who follow a particular athlete, or we have all kinds of examples of celebrities and athletes that become influencers in what people are doing. And I think the medium has shifted from star athletes and movie stars over to YouTube. And it's much more accessible and much more broad. And I think people have to be careful about why they're following somebody and about what that really means. One of the most dangerous influencers I've seen lately are the kids that are climbing to the top of skyscrapers and standing on radio antennas and taking a selfie. I can't see anything more dangerous than that kind of influence. And I also see a lot of influence in the kind of fashion and those other kind of ways. So I think it's important to question why you believe somebody is a leader. I think it's important to understand what that person is, what's behind that person's leadership. Are they leading you, or are they somebody you're watching? I've heard a lot of stories about Tiger King. Haven't even looked at it, don't want to look at it. It looks like a train wreck. But I wonder, are a lot of people now going to start trying to get tigers to take care of in their homes? We'll see. Time will tell with that. But I would say, again, I don't, whether it's a religious leader, whether it's a business leader, there's a couple business books out there that I've looked at that I won't read because I don't like the premise and I don't like the author. It's a self-filtering. It's a direction that you have to decide if you want to go. And it goes down to leadership style. I haven't mentioned that yet, but everything I talked about today is along the lines of a positive leader, along the lines of a servant leader. And I haven't talked anything about negative influence or manipulation to get people to do what you want. Manipulation is using somebody to your own benefit rather than influencing them toward the group goal that the group has to go to. And I think that speaks back to your media influencers. What is the goal of somebody? Where are they going to? Heard a story of some media influencers that were travel people. And I guess they ran on hard times, and they started asking their audience for money to support them to go travel and to go to so-and-so and not have to work. They literally said, so they don't have to work. And the moment they did that, they lost a very large percentage of their audience. Not when they were saying, here's a benefit for you, but you guys give to me so that I can go do this. And it just changed the dialogue, and they lost a huge chunk of their fan base.
I think as the students go out into the work world, I know that the stereotypical engineer basically says, I just don't want to do my job. I don't want to be in charge of anything. I don't want to be the leader. I don't want to be the star. I just want to do the work and be happy. But as they go through their career, it's through leadership, whether subtly behind the scenes or whatever, or being in an appointed role, that will get them to those levels and into those opportunities that will be really fulfilling to them. And likewise, they're going to be asked to follow a variety of leaders, and they're going to need to look at whether they agree with what that leader wants to do. And if they do, how can they support that leader? And immediately I think of the video. If anyone hasn't seen it, I encourage you to go out to the YouTube video about the first follower, and how you have a leader who starts something, but it's not until they get their first follower that it starts to pick up speed. And so the first follower is the one that influences most people who aren't quite committed to say, well, I won't be the only one up there doing that. And so leadership and followership are both very, very strong aspects of this.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And along those lines, you talked about the students going out into the workforce and developing their leadership, and they just want to work and get stuff done. I was very much that way when I started my career. I had no desire to be a manager. I wanted to design things and I wanted to create. And I enjoyed that creating, and I enjoyed getting it done. And I developed a passion in myself to achieve larger things than I could do by myself. And I think that's where I kind of turned a corner into leadership, in saying, let's get this group going in one direction, and let's use that synergy and achieve something more. So I think that's a natural thing that happens when you find your passion, be it in design or engineering, or be it in creating sustainable energy, or bringing sustainable energy or renewable energy to a remote territory that wants it. Those kind of things, that passion to create something bigger than yourself will develop when you find your internal passion.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, well, with that, then I'd like to thank Lynn for a great presentation. I love the highlights that you put in there, and we'll make this available online so that people can go back and rewatch it and review those points. But leadership is something that everyone is going to need to learn, and I know that you're a great resource for that.
Thank you. Yeah, anybody's free to reach out and talk to me about anything. Thank you very much for having me today. I appreciate it.